The Forgotten Map. Brought to you by the darkest reaches, generated by StoryWave.ai. Smash that like button and subscribe for more. Leave a story idea in the comments below so we can create it for you.
Chapter 1. Pioneering the Unknown. Under the cloak of Perdon's soft glow, the Culver family wagon creaked and groaned as it rolled away from the familiar cobbled streets of New York, embarking on a bold journey westward. Ken Culver sat at the reins, his rugged hands steady, guiding the horses with a resolve that was mirrored in the depth of his hazel eyes. Beside him, his wife Mary cradled their youngest trike, her auburn hair catching the light that danced through the leaves of trees, bidding them farewell. "Papa, will I see buffalo?" Samuel's voice, youthful yet tinged with maturity beyond his years, cut through the quiet that had settled around them. Ken glanced back, meeting his son's inquisitive green gaze. "If fortune smiles upon us, surely, Sam. Keep watch for them over the plains." The land began to challenge them as they ventured further, greeting them with its untamed disposition. The wagon wheels fought against the clutch of the mud, and the horses' breaths became visible in the cool air of the wilderness. The stark contrast to their past life was not lost on Mary, whose gentle voice often rose in song to soothe the aching nostalgia that haunted the family. One afternoon, as the sun hung low, coloring the horizon in shades of fire, a figure emerged from the landscape. An old Native American man, face etched with the tales of time, stood before them, his eyes conveying a wisdom that whispered of both the past and the future. "You tread on a path of old spirits," he cautioned, his voice carrying the weight of unseen worlds. "The land you seek is heavy with memories not your own." Ken met the man's gaze, his demeanor unyielding yet respectful. "We seek only a place to call home, to nurture with our hands and hearts." The elder nodded, as if understanding the depth of Ken's yearning, but offered no further blessings or warnings before merging back with the landscape from which he'd come. Days turned to weeks as the family pressed onward, the stark beauty of the terrain a relentless reminder of the life they'd left behind. One evening, a rustling in the brush led to an unexpected confrontation. A party of Native Americans stood cautiously, their eyes wary upon the settlers in their midst. Ken stepped forward, his presence a covenant to the peaceful intentions he carried. "We mean no harm," he declared, his voice a deep and steady emissary of his spirit. A young warrior stepped forth, his stance protective yet curious. "Your journey is bold," he said, "but the land you claim does not yield its secrets lightly." An exchange of words, a sharing of water, and an understanding reached through the veils of difference marked the encounter. Ken watched them disappear as silently as they'd arrived, contemplating the complexities of this new life. In the quiet that followed, the Culver family gathered under a blanket of stars, each one a silent witness to the courage it took to venture towards the unknown, towards dreams that lay nestled in the heart of the New Mexico territory. As they settled into their bedrolls, the land whispered its ancient lullabies, and somewhere in the distance, the howl of a lone coyote sang a haunting melody to the moon. Pioneering the unknown was not a quest for the faint of heart, but for the Culvers, it was the only path that promised a glimpse of a life truly their own. Chapter 2. A Home Amidst the Spirits. At the edge of a sun-drenched valley, bordered by towering mesas and blankets of wildflowers, the Culver family surveyed the expanse of land they could now call their own. The New Mexico territory stretched before them, a canvas for their pioneering dreams. Ken, with a gaze as firm as the earth beneath his boots, turned to Mary and their sons. "We'll build our home right here," Ken declared, pointing to a spot where the grass seemed to dance with the breeze. "What do you think, Mary?" Mary's eyes, reflecting the clear blue sky, scanned the horizon. "It's beautiful," she agreed, her voice steady despite the uncertainty that lay ahead. As the family set to work, the land seemed to push back. Tools went missing, only to be found in odd places. A hammer perched atop a nearby pine, a saw buried beneath a heap of stones. At night, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying strange noises that made sleep a restless affair. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in shades of purple and gold, Samuel wandered away from the construction of their homestead. Drawn by an unexplainable urge, he stumbled upon an ancient artifact half buried in the dirt. It was a peculiar stone, etched with symbols that danced before his eyes. "Look what I found!" he exclaimed, rushing back to show his find. Ken's brow furrowed at the sight. "Be careful, Sam. Such things might be best left alone." But the words were too late. A chill swept through the air, and the earth seemed to hold its breath. The family's efforts to settle only grew more challenging. A wall that had been erected during the day would collapse by nightfall, and the livestock grew restless, as if sensing an unseen presence. One night, as they gathered around the fire, Elijah, the priest they knew as Father Woods, joined them. His blue eyes flickered with the flames as he listened to their tales of misfortune. "The land here is old, its history etched deep." Elijah spoke with a voice that resonated with the wisdom of his years. "You must show respect, seek harmony with the spirits that dwell here." Ken nodded, a sense of determination washing over him. "We'll do what must be done. This land is our future." The family's struggle to adapt was palpable, each day a test of their resilience. Mary tended to the garden, coaxing life from the reluctant soil, while Ken and the boys toiled to give shape to their homestead, each nail driven a small victory. As the chapter of their lives unfolded amidst the wild embrace of the New Mexico territory, the Culver family came to realize that their quest was not only about building a home, but about weaving their story into the fabric of a land that whispered with the echoes of ancient spirits. Chapter 3: The Whispering Winds. The New Mexico sky, once a vast expanse of azure, had darkened to an ominous shade of steel. Ken stood resolute, his hands on his hips, as he surveyed the clouds rolling in over the homestead. The newly built barn creaked in anticipation, its timbers not yet accustomed to the caprice of the wilderness. Samuel, his curiosity piqued by the changing weather, approached his father. "Do you reckon it'll be a bad one, Pa?" Ken eyed the horizon, noting the speed at which the storm approached. "Could be, Sam. Let's secure the animals and batten down what we can." As Ken and Samuel worked against the encroaching tempest, Mary stood at the window of their modest wooden house, her gaze fixed on the undulating grasses that seemed to whisper secrets. She felt a shiver, though not from the cold, and wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders. "Ken," Mary called out as he entered, "there's an ill feeling in the air. It's not just the storm, it's this place." Ken, ever the pragmatist, met her brown eyes with a practical look. "Mary, we've gone over this. It's a new beginning for us. Don't let a few strange happenings and an oncoming storm unsettle you." But as the night drew near, the storm unleashed its fury. Rain hammered the roof like 1,000 drums, and the wind howled with a ferocity that seemed to call out in a language only the land understood. Samuel lay in his bed, the lantern casting long shadows across the room, when he heard a whisper, barely audible over the storm, that seemed to beckon him. "Samuel," the voice hissed, as ethereal as the wind itself. He sat up, his heart racing. "Who's there?" Samuel's voice was a mix of fear and intrigue, a reflection of his youthful audacity. Outside, Ken battled the tempest, his deep and steady voice offering commands to Elijah, who had come to aid them. Together, they fought to keep the homestead from succumbing to nature's wrath. A section of the fence had given way, and Ken knew that without it, the livestock were at risk. "Push against the wind, Elijah. We can't lose what we've built," Ken shouted, his words nearly lost to the storm. Back inside, Mary clasped her hands together, her auburn hair framing her face like a halo in the dim light. "Let them be safe," she whispered, her voice a gentle plea to any force that might be listening. As the night wore on, the storm continued its relentless assault. The family, each in their way, stood against the unseen forces that seemed to conspire against them. In the quiet moments between thunderclaps, Samuel listened for the whispering winds, wondering if the land itself was attempting to communicate with him. With dawn's first light, the storm abated, leaving the world washed anew. The homestead stood battered but unbroken, a history to the family's resolve. As Ken and Samuel surveyed the damage, working to mend the broken fences and calm the spooked animals, they knew their journey was far from over. The whispers that Samuel heard on the wind remained a mystery, a haunting melody that promised more secrets to be uncovered as the family continued their quest to tame the land they had chosen to call home. Chapter 4: Echoes of Warnings. with the morning sun casting its golden light across the vast New Mexico landscape, the Culver family found themselves amid an unexpected gathering. A small contingent from the local tribe had arrived at the edge of their homestead, their horses' hooves stirring the dust into the dry air. The eldest of the group, whom they came to know as Two Ravens, dismounted with a grace that belied his age. His eyes, dark and fathomless, held stories of many winters. Ken, with his inherent wariness, was the first to approach. "Morning," he said with a nod of his head. "To what do we owe the honor?" Two Ravens gestured to the land that stretched behind the Culver's property. "Your family stands at the crossroads of worlds unseen," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The spirit that dwells here does not rest kindly upon intruders." Samuel, his curiosity never far from the surface, stepped closer. "What kind of spirit?" he asked, his voice laced with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "Ancient and vengeful," responded Two Ravens, "one that guards the memories and bones of its people. Many moons ago, it was disturbed, and now it lingers, hungry for reparation." Mary, overhearing the exchange, felt a chill run through her. She joined the circle, her eyes seeking truth in the elder's words. "And what can we do?" she inquired, her voice betraying the doubts that plagued her heart. "We must offer a blessing, a plea for peace," Two Ravens replied, looking to each of them in turn. "But be warned, the spirit's whispers can turn a man's mind, lead him down paths not meant for the living." Ken's jaw set stubbornly. "We appreciate your concern, but I don't believe in curses," he said, unwilling to accept the otherworldly explanation. Tension hung between them like the heavy air before a storm, and Mary cast Ken an imploring look, wishing he would at least consider their words. As the tribe departed, leaving behind cryptic cautions, an uneasy quiet settled over the family. That evening, as the sun retreated beneath the horizon, Samuel began to act strangely, his words disjointed and his actions uncharacteristic. "Sam," Ken called, trying to get his son's attention as the boy wandered aimlessly around the barn. "What's gotten into you?" Samuel's gaze was distant, his voice barely a whisper. "Can't you hear them, Pa? The voices on the wind?" Mary, her hands clasped to her chest, watched with growing fear as one by one their livestock succumbed to an inexplicable sickness, their bodies strewn about the once fertile land. In the stillness of their wooden home, Mary confronted her own doubts. "Maybe coming here was a mistake, Ken," she confessed, her voice a soft echo in the dimly lit room. Ken, ever committed to the land they had chosen, put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We'll get through this, Mary. Together." But as the family lay in their beds that night, listening to the unsettling symphony of the wilderness, each was acutely aware that the echoes of the tribe's warnings had seeped into the very walls of their home, and the malevolence that lurked in the shadows was inching ever closer. Chapter 5: The Spirit Revealed. The Culver homestead, once a lodestar of hope amidst the rolling prairie, now stood eerily silent in the twilight as a dense fog rolled in from the mesas. Ken, Mary, and their children gathered in the main room, the air thick with anxiety. Elijah said to try salt along the doorways, Mary suggested, her voice steady, though her hands betrayed a slight tremor. "It's supposed to ward off evil." Ken nodded, his usual skepticism set aside in the face of their recent troubles. "All right, let's do that, and we'll hang up some of those herbs he mentioned too." Samuel, his green eyes clouded with an otherworldliness that had crept into him since finding the strange stone, sat apart, muttering under his breath. Ken crouched beside his son, concern creasing his rugged brow. "Sam, can you hear me? What are you saying?" But Samuel's words were a jumble, sounds that didn't belong to any language they knew. His body began to shake uncontrollably. "Sam!" Mary rushed to his side, her auburn hair falling like a curtain as she bent over him. "Ken, do something. I'm trying, Mary. Sam, look at me." Ken's deep voice was firm but laced with fear. The wind outside picked up, howling as if carrying the anguished cries of countless lost souls. Then, as suddenly as it began, Samuel's convulsing ceased, and he stared out the window into the night. "There," he whispered, pointing to a shadowy figure that materialized in the gloom, its ethereal presence outlined by the faint moonlight. Ken stepped forward, his protective nature surging to the forefront. "What do you want from us?" he demanded of the apparition. The figure, a spectral embodiment of the land's ancient memories, remained silent, its ghastly aura pulsating with a malevolent energy that sent a chill through the room. The family attempted the rituals Elijah had taught them, but the spirit seemed unmoved by their efforts. As the night wore on, the tension between the Culver family and the unseen forces of the territory only grew. The next day, a group of local tribesmen returned, their expressions a mix of concern and accusation. "You have disturbed the rest of the ancients," one of them, a young warrior with eyes as sharp as flint, said to Ken. "We didn't mean to," Ken replied, frustration building within him. "We've tried to make peace. We've done everything we were told to do." "The spirit does not seek trinkets and words," the warrior retorted. "It seeks acknowledgement, a return of what was taken." Ken's hands clenched at his sides, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. And how do we give back what we don't understand we've taken? The warrior's gaze drifted to Samuel, who stood behind his father, his once vibrant eyes now hollow. The boy carries the burden. The key lies with him. Mary, overhearing the exchange, felt her heart tighten with a mother's instinct to protect her child. "We'll find a way to right this wrong," she said, her resolve clear in her voice. As the tribesmen departed, leaving the family to face the encroaching darkness alone, the whispers of the spirit filled the air, a haunting reminder that the Culver family's quest to tame the land had only just begun. And within that quest lay a deeper journey, one that would require them to confront the very echoes of the past that now threatened their future. Chapter 6: Whispers in the Dark. In the dead of night, the Culver homestead was shrouded in an eerie stillness, broken only by the occasional creak of the wooden frame settling under the weight of tension. Ken sat at the kitchen table, lantern light casting long shadows across his furrowed face. The night's silence was deceptive. Within it lurked a disquiet that had firmly taken root in their lives. Samuel sat across from him, his youthful features drawn tight with an otherworldly knowledge that seemed to pour from him in hushed tones. "The spirit was once a protector," Samuel whispered, his voice not quite his own. "A guardian turned vengeful by betrayal and bloodshed. It seeks to cleanse the land of those who do not belong." Ken listened intently, the skepticism that had long been his armor against the unknown now showing cracks. "What kind of betrayal?" he asked, his deep voice low and steady, seeking to understand the force that held his family in its grasp. "A sacred trust broken," Samuel continued, the green of his eyes seeming to flicker with the spirits of the past. "A pact with outsiders that led to slaughter. The spirit cannot rest, not until it has righted the wrongs done to its people." Mary, who had taken to bed with a fever that no medicine seemed to quell, stirred restlessly. Her illness, another burden the family could ill afford, seemed to be of the same inexplicable nature that plagued their every effort since settling on the land. Ken rose, moving to Mary's side, his hand brushing the auburn hair from her damp forehead. "I should have listened," he muttered, more to himself than to his ailing wife. "We're in this too deep." As dawn crept over the horizon, bringing with it the promise of a new day, the silhouette of two ravens appeared once more at the edge of the property. With him, a group of tribespeople, their faces somber, their eyes reflecting the gravity of the situation. Ken met them outside, the morning sun casting a warm glow over the cool despair that had settled in his heart. "You've come back," he observed, noting the intricacies of their traditional attire, the rich colors speaking of a deep cultural tapestry. "We bring a possible path to peace," Two Ravens stated, his voice carrying the authority of the land itself. "But it requires trust and courage." "What must we do?" Ken's question was tinged with a newfound reverence for the ancient forces they faced. "The boy must be cleansed and an offering made," Two Ravens explained, gesturing to a bundle of herbs, stones, and artifacts laid out before him. "A ceremony to honor the spirits and heal the wounds of time." Ken nodded, the weight of his decision clear in his eyes. "We'll do it, whatever it takes to save my family and this land." The tribe's arrival marked a turning point, the beginning of a fragile alliance against a common, unseen enemy. As the Culver family and the tribe prepared for the upcoming ritual, whispers in the dark promised either salvation or doom, and the journey that lay ahead was fraught with the echoes of a tragic past seeking recompense in the present. Chapter 7: The Darkest Night. As dusk cloaked the sky in shades of deep purple and indigo, Ken noticed the absence of a familiar presence. Sam? Sam! His voice, edged with a father's fear, cut through the stillness of the homestead. But only silence greeted him. Mary, her face drawn with worry despite the swell of new life within her, approached Ken. He's gone? But where? I don't know, Ken replied, grabbing a lantern. But I'll find him. The night was alive with the sounds of the wilderness, a symphony of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The air was chilled, the land an expanse of shadows and unseen eyes. Samuel. Ken's calls were desperate, carried on the breeze that seemed to mock their plight. Mary followed as best as her condition allowed, her breath quickening with each step. Be careful, Ken. The land. It's not just the dark we're fighting. From somewhere in the darkness, there was a soft whimper, a sound that wasn't quite human. Ken spun towards it, his lantern casting a feeble light that struggled against the oppressive dark. Who's there? Ken demanded, his heart pounding against his chest. There was no response, just the whisper of the wind through the brush, a haunting reminder of the spirit that loomed over them. Meanwhile, back at the house, Mary's labor pains began, sharp and sudden. The stress of the night had hastened the arrival of their child. No, not now, she gasped, clutching the wooden frame of the door. Ken returned, his search fruitless, to find Mary in distress. Hold on, Mary. Just hold on, he urged, his voice strained with panic. As the hours passed, Mary brought a new life into the world, a baby girl with her mother's auburn hair and Ken's determined eyes. But the joy was short-lived. Mary's strength ebbed away with the night, and by the break of dawn, she was gone. Ken, cradling the newborn in his arms, felt the weight of his loss like a physical blow. Tears that he'd fought so hard to keep at bay finally fell, mourning the love he'd known and the future they'd dreamed of. The homestead, once a place of hope, now felt hollow, the echoes of Mary's absence a stark reminder of what had been lost. Ken, with his newborn daughter and the unyielding landscape around him, knew the search for Samuel had to continue. His resolve wavered, but did not break. Pa, what are we going to do? The voice of his other son, filled with the fear and confusion of youth, reached Ken's ears. We keep going, Ken replied, the newborn in his arms a demonstration to their need to push forward. We have to find your brother, and we can't let this land or the spirit beat us. As the sun rose, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, the Culver family faced the new day with heavy hearts. The quest was far from over, and the hardest trials yet loomed on the horizon. Ken's resolve, tested by the darkest night, would need to be the lantern that guided them through the trials ahead. Chapter 8. Possessions Peak. Moonlight bathed the homestead in a ghostly silver as Ken sat in weary vigil. His newborn daughter, cradled in his arms, was a fragile sliver of hope in the enveloping gloom. The night was still, too still, when the door creaked open and a familiar silhouette stumbled in. Sam. Ken rose quickly, setting the baby down gently before approaching his son. Where have you been? Samuel's eyes, once vibrant and full of life, now held a chilling glaze as he looked at his father. Away. I was away, he muttered, his voice carrying an eerie distortion. Ken reached out, but Samuel recoiled with an unnatural agility. Stay back, he hissed, backing away into the shadows. What's happened to you, boy? Ken's heart raced, but he kept his tone even, trying to pierce through to his real son. Samuel's laugh was hollow, devoid of any warmth. You think these walls protect you? There's no shelter from the storm that's coming. Ken watched, helpless, as Samuel's form seemed to flicker, as if he was caught between two worlds. The air grew colder, a sign of the ancient's presence. Pa, what's wrong with Sam? The voice of Ken's other son, filled with a mix of fear and concern, echoed from behind. Get back to your room, Ken ordered, his protective instincts flaring. As the night unfolded, Samuel's behavior grew more erratic. He roamed the house, his movements jerky and unnatural. Then, in a moment of terror, he lurched toward the cradle where the baby lay sleeping. Ken intercepted, his farmer's strength grappling with the force that had overtaken his son. Let him go, Ken shouted, struggling to hold Samuel at bay. I will not be silenced. Samuel's voice was a commotion of whispers, the ancient's fury using him as a vessel. Ken's heart pounded against his chest like a drumbeat of war, the sound of his newborn daughter's cries fueling his resolve. He managed to wrestle Samuel away, the confrontation leaving them both breathless and shaken. The next morning, with the sun casting long shadows across the land, Ken sought out Father Woods, the priest who had become their ally in these dark times. "Father, I need your help," Ken implored, the lines on his face etched deeper by the night's ordeal. Father Woods, his blue eyes reflecting a well of compassion, nodded. "I'll do what I can, Ken. This malevolence, it's beyond anything I've seen." Together they returned to the homestead, where Samuel sat, the remnants of the night's chaos still visible in his disheveled appearance. "Samuel," Father Woods began, his voice firm yet not without gentleness, "you must fight whatever holds you. You are stronger than it." Samuel shook his head, a tear tracing a path down his cheek. "It's too powerful." "I can't." "You can, and you will," Father Woods insisted. "We'll face this together." As the day waned, a plan was formed, an exorcism of sorts, to sever the malignant bond between Samuel and the spirit. Ken, Father Woods, and the rest of the Culver family prepared for what would be their most harrowing trial yet. The ancient had shown its power, but they would summon all their courage to reclaim one of their own from possession's dark peak. Chapter 9: Exorcism of the Frontier. The Culver home, usually a sanctuary against the wilds of the frontier, was today a battleground. Elijah Woods, known to the townsfolk as Father Woods, entered through the creaky wooden door, clutching his Bible close to his weathered vestments. "We're ready," Ken said, his voice carrying an edge of desperation as he stood by his son Samuel's side. Father Woods nodded, his face set in grim determination. "The Lord is our refuge and strength. Let us begin." They gathered in the main room where the air hung heavy with the scent of burning sage. Ken's other eyes, wide with a mix of fear and wonder, clutched the family dog, seeking comfort in its steady breathing. "Samuel," Father Woods began, his tone firm, "I command the spirit tormenting you to reveal itself." Samuel's body tensed, his back arching as an otherworldly growl tore from his throat. "You have no power here, man of faith," he spat, his voice not his own. Father Woods raised his Bible high. "Through God, all things are possible. Release this boy." Samuel laughed, a chilling sound that echoed off the log walls. "Your God has no dominion over the ancient ones." Ken watched, his heart racing. "Fight it, Sam. You're stronger than it." As the exorcism intensified, the room seemed to close in around them. Objects began to shake, the wind outside howled, and the flickering candles cast unsettling shadows across the room. "We need something more, something personal to break its hold," Father Woods said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Ken, rummaging through a wooden chest, pulled out a hand-knitted scarf Mary had made for Samuel. "Will this work?" "Anything that ties him to who he is," Father Woods replied, taking the scarf and wrapping it around Samuel's clenched fists. The ancient roared within Samuel, the room temperature dropping so suddenly that their breaths became visible. In a last-ditch effort, Father Woods pressed the scarf to Samuel's forehead and recited a powerful prayer. A blinding light filled the room, and a scream, not from Samuel, but from the depth of the ages, pierced the night. And then, as quickly as it had begun, the room fell silent. Samuel slumped forward, his body limp but his own once more. Ken rushed to his side, lifting his boy into his arms, tears of relief mingling with those of exhaustion. Father Woods, panting heavily, looked around the now peaceful room. It's done. For now, the spirit is at bay. Ken's other son let out a breath he'd been holding, the dog beside him wagging its tail as if in understanding. The exorcism had been harrowing, the ancient's wrath leaving scars on the land and their hearts. But for the moment, they had won. The Culver family, united in their love and unbreakable will, had withstood the darkness that sought to claim them. Their victory, hard fought on this frontier of both land and spirit. Chapter 10: The Final Stand. Under the stark white glow of the moon, Ken stood outside the barn, the night air filled with an electric charge. Samuel, his body racked with the spirit's hold, lay inside, murmuring unintelligibly. "Ken, are you sure about this?" Father Woods asked, his voice a steady presence in the turmoil that surrounded them. Ken nodded, squaring his shoulders as he faced the priest. "I've got to do it, for my family, for Mary, and for Samuel." A rustle came from the barn, and Ken turned to see the shimmering outline of the ancient, its presence sending a shiver down his spine. "I offer you a choice." The spirit's voice was a whisper, yet it boomed inside Ken's mind. "Your life for the boy's freedom." Ken's jaw clenched, his hazel eyes unflinching as he faced the apparition. I reject your deal. We're not bargaining chips for you to play with. The ancient's form flickered, its anger palpable. Then suffer the consequences of your defiance. Ken stepped forward, the very earth beneath his boots seeming to hum with energy. I will protect my family, no matter what you throw at us. Father Woods watched, his blue eyes shining with a mix of admiration and concern. Ken, we need to find where it's buried. It's the source of its power. Together they scoured the land, the moon their silent guide, until they stumbled upon a clearing. Here, the air felt heavier, the ground hallowed, stones arranged in a deliberate pattern. This is it, Father Woods said, his eyes wide as he surveyed the burial ground. This is where the ancient rests. Ken knelt, brushing the dirt from a stone with a carving that matched the etchings on the artifact Samuel had found. We need to consecrate this place, put the spirit to rest for good. Yes, agreed Father Woods, removing a small vial of holy water from his pocket. But we must be quick. Dawn approaches. They worked through the night, reciting prayers, sprinkling holy water, and placing crosses around the perimeter. As the first light of dawn broke through the darkness, the spirit appeared once more, its form now frantic, lashing out against the sanctity they had imposed. You cannot bind me, it wailed, the wind whipping around them in a furious gale. We're not binding you, Ken shouted over the tumult, his voice resolute. We're freeing you. Go in peace. The spirit's energy swirled, a storm of emotion and memory, before it released a final piercing cry and dissipated into the light of the new day. Ken and Father Woods, exhausted but victorious, returned to the barn. Samuel's breathing was calm, his features relaxed. The boy's eyes fluttered open, clear and aware. Pa, he murmured, a small smile gracing his lips. Ken embraced his son, a surge of relief flooding through him. Welcome back, Sam. Father Woods leaned on the barn door, a tired but satisfied grin on his face. You did good, Ken. You did good. As the sun climbed higher, casting its warmth over the land, the Culver family came together, their bond unbroken. They had stood their final stand against the ancient and prevailed, their courage and love the true map that had guided them through the darkness. Chapter 11. The Breaking of Bonds. The first light of dawn cast a warm glow across the homestead, as Ken and Father Woods stood over an ancient leather-bound tome that lay open on the kitchen table. The pages were filled with faded script and cryptic drawings, each symbol a piece of the puzzle they desperately needed to solve. Here, Father Woods pointed to a name etched among the lines of text. It says the spirit's true name is Chalk, the storm bringer. Ken leaned in, his eyes tracing the ancient characters. Chalk, he repeated. So by knowing its name, we can finally be free of it? Father Woods nodded. Names hold power, Ken. Now that we know it, we can sever its ties to this land. Samuel sat by the hearth, the darkness that had once clouded his eyes now replaced with clarity. He overheard their exchange and felt a chill run down his spine. Pa, do you think it'll work? Samuel's voice quivered with a mixture of hope and lingering fear. It has to, Ken replied, offering his son a determined nod. As the day progressed, the homestead was filled with the sounds of preparation. Ken and Father Woods recited incantations, sprinkling consecrated herbs around the borders of their land. Chalk, hear our call, Father Woods intoned, his voice powerful in the open air. Your reign here is over. By the power of your true name, we break your bonds to this world. The wind picked up, rustling through the trees with an angry hiss. The river nearby roared louder, as if protesting against the words being spoken. Samuel, drawn to the river's edge by an unseen force, stood trembling as the water swelled and churned. Samuel, get back from there, Ken shouted, rushing towards his son. But it was too late. With a final act of desperation, the spirit lashed out and Samuel stumbled, his foot catching on a slick stone. With a splash that cut through the tension of the incantation, he fell into the raging waters. Sam, Ken cried out, diving into the river after him. The current was merciless, pulling at Ken's limbs as he searched for Samuel. His fingers grazed his son's shirt, but the fabric slipped through his grasp. Father Woods, at the riverbank, continued the chant, his voice a lantern for Ken in the tumult. Release him, Chalk! Your time here is done, he cried to the skies. With a final, defiant roar, the spirit's essence evaporated, its presence in the river waning as the waters calmed. But the damage had been done. Samuel's body lay still, cradled in the shallows, where Ken had managed to pull him ashore. Ken knelt, heartbroken, beside his son. The spirit was gone, but so was a part of his soul. He looked up at Father Woods, his face a mask of grief and guilt. "It's not your fault, Ken," Father Woods said softly, coming to stand beside him. "You did everything you could." The sun dipped low, casting long shadows over the land that had been both their dream and their nightmare. The Culver family faced a new reality, one without Samuel. Ken, his heart heavy with the loss of his son, knew that the journey was far from over. In the days that followed, the homestead seemed quieter, the laughter and joy that once filled the air now replaced with a solemn reflection. Ken held his remaining children close, vowing to honor Samuel's memory by living the life they had all dreamt of together on this frontier. The breaking of bonds had come at a great cost, but in the end, it had brought them a semblance of peace. Chapter 12. The Echoes of Solitude. The sun hung low over the prairie, casting long shadows as Ken stood solemnly by 3 fresh mounds of earth. His hands, though roughened by toil, were gentle as he placed hand-carved markers upon each grave. His daughter, swaddled tightly, lay cradled in the crook of his arm, her tiny face peaceful, unaware of the loss that surrounded them. Ken inhaled deeply, the air filled with the scent of wild sage and earth. "Your mama was the bravest woman I've ever known," he whispered to the baby. "And your brother, he had a wild spirit. You got a legacy to grow into, little one." From the edge of the clearing, 2 ravens watched, his eyes a mix of respect and sorrow. He stepped forward, the soft sound of his movement catching Ken's attention. "I didn't think I'd see you here," Ken said, his voice holding a weary edge. "We watch," 2 ravens replied, his tone even, "to ensure the ancient silence remains. Your burden has not gone unnoticed." Ken nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the tribe's vigilance. "I've got to teach her," he gestured to his daughter, "how to live with the land, not just on it. The land will teach her, as will you," 2 ravens said, his gaze lingering on the infant. "She is the new seed of this place." Days turned to weeks, and Ken found solace in routine. The strange occurrences that once plagued the homestead became rare, yet he remained alert, the rifle never far from his reach. His daughter, whom he named Grace, grew strong and alert under his care. Her curious eyes took in the world with wonder, and Ken felt a swell of protectiveness with each of her milestones. "See this, Grace?" Ken held up a tuft of buffalo grass, its resilient strands withstanding the prairie winds. "You gotta be like this strong, no matter which way the wind blows." Grace gurgled, her tiny hand reaching out to grasp the green blade. Ken taught her the sounds of the prairie, the calls of the meadowlark, and the distant rumble of thunder. At night, he told her stories of her mother and brother, keeping their memory alive under the blanket of stars. "Your pa's doing right by you," Father Woods said one evening as he visited, bringing with him supplies and news from town. Ken looked up from where he was mending a fence, Grace bundled on his back. "It's all I can do. She's all I got left." Father Woods nodded, offering a small, reassuring smile. "You're doing more than you know. You're giving her a legacy." Ken's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the sky met the earth in a dance of colors. "I hope it's enough." As Grace grew, so too did Ken's determination to forge a life for her, one that was connected to the land but not haunted by its past. He taught her to respect its beauty and beware its hidden dangers. And always, from the corners of his eye, he noticed the subtle signs of the tribe's presence, watching, guarding, a silent promise that the ancient would not rise again. Chapter 13, A New Dawn. The prairie sun crested the distant mesas, washing the Culver homestead in a golden hue. Ken leaned against the wooden fence, watching as his daughter Grace, now a young girl with fiery hair and eyes full of curiosity, chased after the chickens with a laugh that lifted the heavy past from his heart. "Grace, remember to close the coop, or the foxes will have a feast tonight," Ken called out, his voice firm but edged with humor. Grace stopped in her tracks, her boots kicking up dust as she turned to face her father. "I won't forget, Pa. I learned from the best," she replied, her tone a blend of mischief and respect. As they walked back to the house, Ken pointed to the sprawling fields that stretched out before them. "This land is tough, but we're tougher. Always be aware of what's around you." Grace nodded, taking in every word. "I know, Pa. You've told me the stories. about Ma and Sam. Ken's eyes clouded for a moment, memories flashing through his mind, but he pushed them aside. That's right, he acknowledged. You've got your Ma's heart and your brother's bravery. Use them well. Inside their home, Ken showed Grace the map that had led them to this land. Its edges worn, but its promise still alive. This map is part of our history, part of you. And one day, you'll add your own paths to it, he said, tracing the lines with a calloused finger. Grace leaned in, her green eyes studying the intricate details. I will, Pa. Maybe I'll find a new river, or even mountains no one's seen before. That's the spirit, Ken smiled, ruffling her hair. But for now, let's focus on what's here. Help me with the fence by the creek tomorrow? You got it, Pa. We'll make it the sturdiest fence this side of the Rio Grande. Grace beamed, her confidence infectious. As the day wound down and the sky turned to a canvas of purples and pinks, Ken taught Grace to ride. Her form was natural, as if she'd been born to it, her laughter echoing across the open plains. You're a natural, Gracie. Ken cheered, his heart swelling with pride as he watched her. She brought the horse back to a trot, her smile wide and full of life. You think I could win races with this, Pa? Ken chuckled. I wouldn't bet against you, that's for sure. When the stars began to pepper the night sky, Ken and Grace sat on the porch, the creaking of the swing a familiar comfort. You're going to be just fine, Grace. I can feel it, Ken said, his voice barely above a whisper as he gazed up at the constellations. Grace snuggled closer, the cool night air nipping at her cheeks. I'll make you proud, Pa. We're Culvers, we don't give up. No, we don't, Ken agreed, his arms wrapped protectively around his daughter. We adapt, we learn, and we keep going. The scars of the past would always be part of their story, but Ken replaced fear with caution, teaching Grace to navigate a world that could be as harsh as it was beautiful. With each passing day, he instilled in her the strength and wisdom to face anything, ensuring that the Culver name would not just endure, but flourish in this new dawn. Chapter 14, Legacy of the Spirit. The afternoon sun dipped low, casting the Culver homestead in a warm orange glow. Grace stood at the edge of the porch, her eyes tracing the horizon where the sky kissed the earth. She clutched a weathered letter, the handwriting familiar and dear. Two ravens, his hair now streaked with silver, approached from the path that led to the fields. He was a good man, your father, he said, his voice carrying the deep timbre of the earth itself. Grace nodded, her gaze never leaving the rolling landscape that had been her family's legacy. He taught me everything I know. Two ravens pointed to the letter in her hands. His last words? Yeah, Grace replied, her voice steady. He left it for me. Said it was important. May I? Two ravens gestured to the letter, and Grace handed it to him. He read aloud, his voice imbuing Ken's words with life. My dearest Grace, if you're reading this, then I've passed on to the next journey. I leave you our land, our home. It's been a place of joy and sorrow, but always a place of strength. Keep it, love it, and remember the roots from which you've grown. But be cautious, my child. The whispers of the ancient may still linger. Stand firm, as we Culvers always have, and keep your heart open to the wisdom of the land and its people. You're the best of us, Grace. Your mother's warmth, Sam's courage, and I like to think a bit of my stubbornness. I love you. Pa tears brimmed in Grace's eyes, but she blinked them away. She was Ken's daughter, after all, strong and resolute. Two ravens handed back the letter, his expression somber yet respectful. You have a choice now, Grace. What will you do? Grace looked out at the fields, the barn, and the creek where she'd played as a child. I'll stay, she said without hesitation. This is my home, my family's home. As the day turned to evening, Grace walked the land, feeling each blade of grass and each gust of wind as a part of her soul. The whispers on the wind were faint, but she heard them a distant echo of the ancient's presence. She wasn't afraid, though. Ken had taught her to respect the spirits, the land, and its history. She turned back to the house, to the life she'd built, and knew she was ready to face whatever came. The Culver name would live on, its connection to the land as enduring as the stars overhead. And Grace, with the lessons of her father etched into her being, would continue the quest, not just to survive, but to thrive in the embrace of the frontier's vast, untamed spirit. Chapter 15, The Culver Homestead. Grace stood by the fence that bordered their land, the wooden posts sturdy and the wire taut. The amber waves of grain rustled in the prairie wind, a soft, hushing sound that spoke of the earth's endless conversation. "Looks like the wheat's coming in strong this year," remarked Jacob, a neighboring settler who had come to lean on the fence and share in the view of the flourishing fields. "It sure is," Grace replied, tucking a loose strand of fiery hair behind her ear. "It's been a good season. Rain came just when we needed it." Jacob nodded, his eyes scanning the expanse of green and gold. "Your pa would be proud. This place, it's an attestation to what one family can do with a bit of grit." Grace chuckled softly. "Grit and a whole lot of stubbornness. Pa left big boots to fill." The conversation paused as they both took in the scene. The Culver homestead, a patchwork of life against the sprawling canvas of the frontier. "You ever think about leaving?" Jacob finally asked, his tone casual but his glance keen. "I've thought about it," Grace admitted, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "But this land's in my bones, Jacob. It's part of who I am." The clatter of a wagon approaching drew their attention. It was Elijah, now an elder with a beard as white as the cottonwood fluff that danced on the breeze. "Grace, Jacob," he greeted them, tipping his hat. "I brought those apple saplings you wanted to plant, Grace. Ready to put down some more roots?" Grace's smile was warm as the afternoon sun. "Absolutely, Elijah. Let's get to it." The trio worked together, digging into the rich soil, the earth yielding to their efforts as they planted the future orchard. Grace's hands, covered in the fine prairie dust, worked with a practiced ease. As the day waned and the first stars peeked through the twilight, Grace sat on the porch, the wooden boards creaking under her weight. A sense of peace settled over her, the doubts about staying or leaving dissolving like mist in the morning sun. "You're staying, then?" Elijah's voice broke the evening silence. "I am," Grace said, her voice resolute. "This is where my story continues." "That's good to hear," Elijah replied. "A place like this, it shapes you, and you, in turn, shape it." Grace looked down at her hands, the lines and calluses a map of years of work and care. "I reckon it does. And I've got plans, Elijah. This place will be here for my children and theirs after." Elijah nodded, a knowing smile on his lips. The Culver legacy lives on. And so it was that the Culver homestead, once a place of hardship and haunting, became a balefire of hope and prosperity in the heart of the frontier. Grace, with her father's determination and her mother's kindness, stood as the new guardian of their legacy, her spirit as unyielding as the land itself. She faced the future with her head held high, her dreams as vast as the prairie sky, and her heart firmly rooted in the soil of her ancestors. Chapter 16. A wisp of the past. Grace, now in the full bloom of womanhood, tended to the garden beside her home, her hands moving with practiced ease through the rich soil. Her children, Ethan and Lily, played nearby, their laughter a melody that danced on the wind. A shadow fell across the rows of vegetables, and Grace looked up to see an older Native American man standing at the edge of the garden. His hair, long and peppered with gray, framed a face that carried the map of many seasons. "Ethan, Lily, come here," Grace called, her eyes still on the visitor, who seemed like a living echo from another time. The children obeyed, their curious eyes fixed on the man. "Who's that, Mama?" Lily asked, her voice a soft chirp. "He's a friend," Grace answered, her gaze warm but alert as she approached the visitor. "I'm Grace. Can I help you?" The man nodded, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I am called Soaring Hawk. I met your father, Ken, many years ago when you were but a child." Grace's heart quickened. Soaring Hawk was a bridge to her past, to her father's stories. "You knew my pa?" "I did," Soaring Hawk confirmed, "and like him, you must remain watchful. The cycle of the ancient is long, and its whispers can still touch this land." Grace looked back at her homestead, the golden fields beyond, and her children. "I understand. We've always been careful." Soaring Hawk's gaze followed hers. "Good. The alliance between our people is important. It keeps the balance." Ethan, a brave spark in his young eyes, stepped forward. "Are you talking about the spirit, the one from Pa's stories?" Grace nodded. "Yes, Ethan. Soaring Hawk here is reminding us to respect the land and its history." Lily clung to Grace's skirt, her small face serious. "We won't forget, right, Mama?" "Never," Grace assured her, placing a hand on her daughter's head. "These stories are our history, our guide." As Soaring Hawk turned to leave, Grace felt a kinship that spanned generations, a shared guardianship of the land they both called home. "Thank you, soaring hawk," she said, her voice carrying the weight of her gratitude. The elder nodded, his silhouette blending with the horizon as he departed. Grace returned to her children, her hands resting on their shoulders. "Remember, the land speaks to those who listen," Grace imparted, her eyes sweeping over the Culver homestead. "We're part of it, and it's part of us." Ethan and Lily nodded, a new understanding dawning in their young minds. "We'll listen, Mama. We'll learn," Ethan promised. And as the sun dipped below the mesas, casting the world into shades of twilight, the Culver family stood united, their legacy a tale of resilience and respect, a narrative forever woven into the fabric of the frontier. Chapter 17, Spirits of the Forgotten Trail. Grace knelt by the creek, her hands carefully placing stones one atop the other. Ethan and Lily watched, their young faces serious in the fading light of day. "What are you making, Mama?" Lily's voice was soft as she handed her mother another smooth river stone. Grace placed it with care. A shrine for all that's been, for all that will be. Ethan, his brow creased in thought, looked at the growing structure. "Is it for Pa and Sam?" "And for the ancient spirit," Grace added, patting the earth around the base of the shrine. "They re part of this land now, just as we are." Lily's small hand traced the outline of a stone. "Will the spirit come back?" Grace shook her head, her voice confident. "Not if we respect it, keep the stories alive, and remember." Ethan nodded, a newfound understanding dawning in his eyes. "I'll tell my kids one day. They should know. And they'll tell theirs," Grace affirmed, standing now, her silhouette a stark contrast against the twilight sky. "It's how we honor them all." Later, seated around the fire, the family shared tales of the past, the flames flickering as if to animate the stories. Pa said the spirit was like a storm, Ethan recalled, his voice taking on the cadence of a natural storyteller, powerful and wild. Lily snuggled closer to her mother, but he and two ravens made peace in a way. "That they did," Grace agreed, her gaze lost in the dance of the fire. "We must remember both the good and the hard times." The children listened, the weight of their heritage evident in their attentive silence. "Will we always stay here, Mama?" Lily's question hung in the air, mingled with the crackle of the wood. Grace looked at her children, her heart swelling with love. "As long as the land will have us, we're Culvers, we're part of its story." The night deepened, and one by one, the stars appeared, watching over the Culver homestead. The small shrine by the creek stood as an evidence to their journey, a symbol of coexistence and respect, a family's acknowledgement of the spirits of the land and of their hearts. Chapter 18, Whispers Amongst the Willows. Grace stood by the river, the water's surface mirroring the shifting clouds above. The willows on the bank swayed gently, their leaves whispering secrets of the past. "Mama, why do you come here?" Lily's voice broke the riverside's calm, her small hand finding Grace's. "It's a special place," Grace replied, kneeling to meet her daughter's gaze. "Your Uncle Samuel, he used to play here, before I had you and your brother." Ethan, not far behind, skipped stones across the calm water, each plop stirring ripples that spread and disappeared. "Do you miss him?" Grace paused, her heart a reservoir of memories. "Every day, but missing someone is part of loving them." The children nodded, a silent understanding passing between them. "Mama, will the spirits come back?" Ethan asked, his tone curious yet cautious. Grace stood, her posture strong against the whispering wind. "Spirits are like these willows, Ethan. They're part of the land. They might whisper to us, but we don't need to fear them." Lily's eyes, wide and thoughtful, remained on the flowing water. "How do you not be scared?" "You remember what your Grandpa Ken taught us," Grace said, her voice a gentle echo. "Be brave, be kind, and always respect the land." "Did Pa teach you that too?" Ethan's stone skipped 3 times before sinking. "He did," Grace affirmed, watching as the stone's ripples faded into stillness. "And now I'm teaching you. Will we always hear the whispers?" Lily's question hung in the air, mingling with the sound of rustling leaves. "Maybe," Grace answered, her hand brushing over the willow's bark. "But remember, it's just the ancient speaking, and we know how to live with it." Ethan and Lily exchanged a glance, a bond of siblings and shared history between them. "We won't forget, Mama," Ethan stated, his voice carrying a strength beyond his years. "And we'll teach our kids too," added Lily, her conviction bright in her eyes. Grace smiled, her heart full. That's the spirit. As they walked back to the homestead, the sun began to set, painting the sky in strokes of orange and purple. The Culver land stretched around them, tranquil and alive with the promise of tomorrow. "You think we'll be okay, Mama?" Lily's question was soft as she looked up at the twilight sky. "We will," Grace reassured her, her hand resting on her children's shoulders. "We've got each other, and we've got this land. That's more than enough." The whispers of the ancient were there, a soft murmur amongst the willows, but they were just whispers, reminders of all that had been and all that was yet to come. The Culver family moved forward, their legacy not one of fear, but of courage, woven into the very fabric of their existence.
Thank you for listening. Subscribe now and visit our website, StoryWave.ai, to start creating your own generative audiobooks today. StoryWave is the only true on-demand entertainment portal.